and we are joined now by Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7. BC, what's going on?
Oh, not too much. How are you guys?
BC, I'm curious. I want to get this out of the way early because I'm a baseball dork. Streak. How do you feel about your team being one of the streakier teams in baseball? Like, it seems like if you win 4 in a row, you're going to somehow get to double digits potentially. But if you're losing, it's like, that was nice while it lasted. I think you're up to what, 6 or 7 in a row again now?
Yeah, I feel good about it right now. I mean, if you asked me this during one of our 8 or 9 game losing streaks, I might
It's
have a different
crazy.
answer for you. But the Twins are 0-7 against the Yankees, so they're done with the Yankees. That's the good part.
Mm-hmm.
They're 0-5 against Schaefer's Cleveland Guardians, and that's a big story in the streak. And then the winning streak, they do really well against teams that suck. I mean, they handle their business, and so good for them on that. The Rays aren't terrible, but they're not having a vintage.
Boy, how about that meltdown yesterday?
Crappy Rays season. Yeah. So I'm feeling good about it right now, Damon. It's a good time to ask me that question. I appreciate it.
Ooh, a little pep in his voice too. Okay.
We got some peppy BC here with the. I saw you tweet out, was it Royce O'Neal the other day, where you're like, "Hey, if this guy stays healthy, he's better watch out." Is that just a Twins thing? You always have really good players that can't stay healthy, or what's going on there?
I don't know if I put that out there. Royce Lewis, you're talking
Royce
about?
Lewis. I'm sorry. Who's Royce O'Neal?
Hooper.
Is that the Iowa State guy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Rolls Royce. Rolls Royce is a
Yeah.
little different. He's interesting.
Or maybe I just saw it and made me think of you, and I was like, yeah, this could be a Byron Buxton tweet.
Next thing you know, he's going to be saying Pablo Escobar, not Pablo Lopez. It's like, well, wait, where did I get Pablo Escobar from?
Oh, I know who Pablo Escobar is. Burger Sugar King.
That was my fault. I should have just went with it and called him Royce O'Neal too. But
he said Royce O'Neal.
He's the guy that had anxiety about flying, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
He's good. The playoffs last year, he was the guy who helped them beat the Blue Jays and get out of the first round for the first time. So he's a dude at like 23, 24. He's had like 2 serious injuries, and then the first game of the year, stretching a double into a triple, pulled something and was out 2 months. But he's back. He's playing well, and we're hoping he's through that and not on the Buxton formula.
All right.
I mean, I just gotta ask.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's because of just coming off serious daddy duties, but Schaefer is pretty overwhelmed with June. It is a heck of a month for you recruiting. Are you feeling the pressure, or are you kind of like, you know what? Kind of getting used to this new change and how these months happen now over the last couple of years?
I'm getting used to it. The challenge for me, I kind of bounce around to a lot of different things. Like I'll write about the current team and we're analyzing the left guard spot one day, and then I'm popping over and doing some recruiting, and then I'll be, doing a story about, Corey Campbell. And so my only issue is sometimes when I go on the radio, I've got all these wires like crossing over each other. And so sometimes I'm like, if you ask me to name, I've written a bunch of stories about like guys who have received offers and stuff like that. But if you right now gave me a quiz and said okay, name like 5 of them on the spot, it would be a tough duty for me because my wires would be like, okay, I got to move off of Corey Campbell now. And I was thinking about Bryce Benhart just 10 minutes ago. So that's what it's like for me, but that's not a bad thing. It's kind of good in the moment where you're like, okay, now I'm going to go over and have this slice of pie, and now I'll go over there and have that slice. But no question, it's become a month that's probably one of the busiest we have when it used to be the most boring. So it's amazing how that switched in about the last 4 or 5 years.
How about the trio of let's just go with Douglas, SJ, and Eli? Those wires don't cross. You can connect those pretty easy, right? Those 3.
Yeah, I didn't hear who you said though.
Douglas, as in
Okay.
Utu, SJ,
Yeah,
and Eli.
Yeah. They continue to recruit that school well, put themselves in the running. There's a lot of elbows out for those guys like SJ in particular. But you're in the mix. Donovan Raiola just connects really well with those guys. I've come all the way around on him as a recruiter. It doesn't matter how he is with the media and how that connects to recruiting. Sometimes we do that where it's like, oh, this guy seems like he's more outgoing up front, so obviously he's got that sort of flair when it comes to connecting with recruits. Donovan Raiola just has that way about this. He's technique oriented. He's all business. But I think those guys also are able to get inside and have real heart to heart with him, and he shows another side that we don't always see, and he does really well. Every recruit I ever talk to that comes out of a visit that's a lineman tends to have rave reviews about him. So I'm really impressed with what he continues to do. And you talk about how things have flipped. He's a storyline that certainly flipped within this Husker fan base.
Apparently, you and me both are in the same camp, and because I watched him work back-to-back weekends, just up close, right? Yeah. I just free to go do whatever, so I kind of just watch him because I think one-on-one he's captivating. I almost never want to leave. I love the way he's raised his kiddos. His wife is fantastic. So I'm like, all right, now I'm all in. I want to see why the magic happens, because that room, BC, is, I would say, the way that they do business and their uniformity is the standard. It's what all the other position groups and position coaches want to be like. I mean that. The other thing is, what I text Dom mid Saturday, and I was like, I can't. It was short. It was something to the effect of, I said, wow, your brother is incredible. I'm just watching him work, and I maybe said another adjective or two. And Dom's response was, he's down at graduation at TCU, and he's like, well, yeah, I've known that. I've been trying to tell people he's a real one. So apparently only me and you are the ones that were didn't get the level of, God, this guy is really, really good. Because there must be a lot more Doms out there that understand Donnie, because he didn't bat an eye at it. He's yeah, he is a real one.
Yeah, that's true. You watch him at camp, he's going to give everything to every guy that's in front of him. And those guys, the thing I notice is they are all in to everything that he's instructing. And I know he told us in the spring about his knuckles up technique, and I couldn't get all into that stuff and what the difference is between how he teaches something and another guy. But recruits and whoever is in front of him is always curious and really willing to learn from him. So he just does have a way when he gets on that field and when he gets behind those walls with his guys, that they believe in him. I always go back to Rhule when he was deciding what to do with his staff, and of course Donovan was the one guy they retained. It's amazing. Everybody stood up on the table for him and said, this is the guy, keep this guy. And that included, if you remember, a guy or two who was transferring, leaving the program, and they still said that. And that was when I was like, okay, some people need to reassess, understand he had a really challenging year one with the hand he was dealt. Let's see what happens. And ever since then, I think people have gotten a more crystal clear view of sort of what he's all about as a coach and as a recruiter now, which I think is nice to see too for people.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. Staying on Donnie here for a second, BC, is it possible that the things that make him not super engaging necessarily to the media are also the same things that help him connect with his particular position group? Because it's not like most offensive linemen are particularly gregarious the same way that your wide receivers are, for instance.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's some truth to that, and I don't want to make it seem like it's bad with the media. The last time in the spring when he was up there, we had a real good session with him, and that's when he sort of talked about his technique and some things like that. So he's definitely said some interesting things too. He has always been a little more quiet in front of the microphone, but that's all right. Some guys are like, I don't got to put this all out there for everybody else. Some of this stuff is from my room, and we'll put out some stuff, but some stuff goes for those guys. And you're right though. In the O-line coaches that I've covered over the years, they would never be usually the spokesperson of the assistant coaches up front. You know, they are kind of that way. Mike Cavanaugh comes to mind. So I understand though when you see him up close with the guy, he just connects on that level, you know, like personal that players really enjoy, and they always talk about it. Some of the guys who are Polynesian recruits connect with him and his background, and so there's a lot of things that are have put Nebraska in play with a lot of really good linemen. If you look at who they've recruited since he's been here, he's done a pretty bang up job, I think.
And how about like right on cue, 2027 gets an offer, and Matt Erickson, a mountain of a player over at Millard West. He's been big his whole life. He used to go to middle school or elementary school with my youngest. He's a year older. He's always been a big, strong kid. It's interesting to see on this level as we're talking about guys from Bishop Gorman, and the offensive line talk is hot with what Nebraska's been able to do. And it's good to see a local 2027 get an offer, because you get the sense now there's a certain level of trust with their eye in terms of what they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not holding back on guys, and they're also, you know, there's really good recruits that they didn't necessarily offer yet, but I know they still have their eye on, you know, like Landon Von Seegern or somebody like that.
Who just picked up another offer from Kansas.
Yeah, he's been doing well. He's got, I think, Iowa State, K-State, and Kansas, as you say.
I think he's got Iowa. I think he's got Iowa.
Oh yeah, Iowa. You're right.
Yeah.
And that's a guy who, when I watched camp, I thought, you know, he's a good-looking prospect too. But some of those guys who haven't been offered yet, they know that this staff is still watching them and wants to maybe see just a little more film this fall, and we'll see what happens. But you're absolutely right, Damon. They're looking at 26 and 27 a lot, and occasional 28 guy pops into some conversation here and there. But with Matt Erickson, just like you kind of see him in person, you're like, yeah, it's not a matter of if he was going to get offered by Nebraska. It was when. When was last night. Had to be a great moment for the family. As he said in his message, he's been a diehard Husker his whole life. So that one looks like a recruiting situation where Nebraska's probably going to be in good position for that one. But you can understand when you see him up close. Yeah, that's a guy that's probably a D1 player.
BC, not to harp on Raiola this whole time, and that's Donnie, not either Dom or Dylan. Have to be a little more specific here, I suppose, or Dayton for that matter. But a lot of Raiolas floating around Nebraska these days. But Donnie, not to harp on him too much, but you know, you said something that you finally came around on him. I was curious, was there a specific point you remember where you're like, maybe I got it wrong on this guy, or is it kind of just like there had to be a tipping point for you, right? Where you're like, maybe this guy's better than I realized.
I was never down on him as a recruiter. I just didn't know. Like, that was more it for me. I was always in the camp where his first year as a coach here, I understood what Rhule and Satterfield were saying. It's like nobody would have done well with the hand he was playing that first year as a coach. So I had no real judgment, and I had a very open mind about him going forward as a coach. It was as a recruit where I was really curious because I didn't know his personality behind doors that well, and hadn't talked to enough recruits who'd been on visits yet where I had a good sense of how he did at that part. He didn't have a ton of like college experience, you know, as a coach with that recruiting background. So you kind of wondered how that would play. But then there's that moment where, you know, they're in the hunt for some of these guys like Grant Bricks, and you see them convincing, Rugaroli from Gorman, another Bishop Gorman guy. Just some good recruits in that last class, and I kind of put it all together. I was like, you know what? You look at the names that have stacked up. He's done a really nice job, and even the ones he doesn't get, it's sort of like those guys who transferred out of the program. They still say really good things about him. They still like him. They didn't not pick Nebraska because of Donovan Raiola. So I just kind of added it up, and I think at some point last year, I was like, you know what, he's a pretty good recruiter, and now I'm thinking like he might even be a notch above what I thought as a recruiter. So he's just kind of went up the escalator with me with how he does with certain guys, and how Nebraska's always kind of in the mix with some of these these big men that are pretty intriguing prospects.
Ravi was trying to get me all fired up and put all this pressure on the running backs yesterday by saying they need to be better. And I'm thinking to myself, offensive line is going to play a huge role in that. They look pretty good. And I went back last night just because, I don't know, I'd rather be right than well-liked. That spring game, Nebraska's handoff run game, it was okay.
Yeah.
Like it was, because I was like, wait a minute, I might have spoke too quick snapping at him like that. But I liked their movement, and I felt like, all right, if they're not going to have quarterback run game and they have to be creative with how they get there or just be good up front if they're in the gun, it was – I felt like they were pretty good at the point of attack in the spring.
Yeah, they weren't bad in the spring game. It sounded like from the reviews we got they did okay. And it wasn't like anyone was just gushing over the top about it, but they were getting some stuff done. And obviously they were going against a pretty good defense. Now, some of the main guys were out of that defense, of course, in the spring game and at times in the scrimmages, but still.
But they used a lot of young linemen too. So that's that was like the great equalizer.
Yeah, you're right. And, when you look at the line, it is a group where they should be like eight guys deep, where you feel pretty good about it at this point. And Ben Scott, I think, is someone we should not take for granted. Center, when I think about the years I've covered the team, has always been one of those positions where sometimes a guy would pop up for a year or two and you'd feel good, but then you'd kind of be like, okay, who's next after him, right? Like you kind of couldn't play out the map in your head. And even at that spot now, I think about, well, when Scott's done, you could have Justin Evans could slide in there, Sam Sledge. I think Jake Peters, who just arrived on campus, is a guy they might want to work at center some. And so you can kind of see at certain positions where it can head, not just with the veterans that are here at certain spots, but who's next in line. And that's good. Tackle, you still got to have some guys, I think, sort of emerge as that your third, fourth, fifth guys who are the future that, stamp their place. But I feel pretty good about the O-line. And I've always said, I thought they took a step last year, and now I in my opinion, I'd love to see them take that step. I felt the defensive line sort of did very suddenly last year, where you looked up in the season and you're like, man, I love the depth here. I feel like they can go this way or that way, and they've actually got some more options. And I feel like O-line could be able to prove that this fall. They just got to go out and do it.
BC, I just had a crazy thought here, and maybe it is crazy, maybe it's not. But you mentioned the tackle spot, and that's a spot where they haven't necessarily recruited quite as strongly as they have the interior. But then I think about, okay, what does that maybe look like moving forward? And I realize, okay, they have recruited like 1 million tight ends. And that's something you used to see a lot, is guys with good frames and good athletes that they'd move from tight end to tackle. Do you think that maybe some of the solutions are already on the roster and just not at that spot yet?
An X factor could be Canuck too. We're kind of forgetting about him. I like him.
Yeah, and he did come up a time or two from coaching.
I like him a lot, man.
Yeah, he might be rounding into the mix. Hey, O-line's tough. I always think, because there are guys like Canuck every year where people just sort of forget about them, because they've been like behind the scenes, kind of working their body, figuring out a few things for a year or two. Sometimes it takes 2-3 years, and you're like, oh yeah, that guy. And then suddenly comes in and he's like, okay, he's ready to roll. And that's when you really got it cooking, when you have those type of guys like Canuck, who suddenly one spring you look up and it's like, okay, he could be a part of the rotation at some point. Grant Bricks is a guy who obviously they could develop out there, I think. So they've got some interesting guys. Gunnar Gattul is a pretty versatile O-lineman who I know showed up on the early summer list for getting after it. So that's positive. So there's definitely some names that can be that future. They just need to have those guys have good falls, even if they're not playing games, right? Like getting stuff done behind the scenes with their body and their nutrition and all that. And so next spring, even if they didn't play this year, they're the next in line. They're the next story that pops up where we're like, oh yeah, that guy. So if you can get that wheel turning, you're really rolling as a program.
I want to stay with kind of this interior discussion of O-line, D-line, and think of it like this, BC, relative to how this team's built currently. and two position groups are going to do a standing broad jump. They both need to jump. They both clearly need to jump. Who needs to jump further? Quarterbacks or special teams?
Quarterbacks or special teams? I'm going to say quarterbacks. I think I both need to do it. Don't get me wrong, but if it's one or the other, I just felt quarterback play was so on the average or below last year. I have really respected what Heinrich did as a runner and as a competitor and all that stuff, but to see him even grow in the passing game was really encouraging. But if you can make me a believer, like on 3rd down and 5-6 yards, you've got the QB now that you can work that intermediate passing game. You can move the chains, and you're not kind of covering one of your eyes like when the play is happening, thinking something bad is going to happen. I just think that's going to be such a step for this program. I think the run game can feed off of that. So that's my answer, but it's an interesting question in the way the two groups you framed it, because I want to see more out of special teams too. Like, I want to see a dynamic returner emerge. I want to see a couple more block kicks. I know Ed Foley talks about you set the tone early in the season where you maybe block a punt in one of those September games and it changes things and opens up your return game. Like, so I want to see something like that in the non-con game where they break through and block a punt or something. All that stuff's going to really add up when you talk about a team that is attached to the slogan chasing 3. You can't dismiss there is no little part. They all matter. Like, every part's got to pull their weight, and special teams certainly has to be that group that has you playing the game with like a 5-yard field position advantage as opposed to a 5-yard disadvantage, which a lot of years Nebraska's played with. It's been as much a problem as a turnover margin stat, honestly, if you look back at it.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate the time as always. Good stuff, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, B.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks, guys.